Welcome to the Kenyon House on Newburgh Road in Evansville, Indiana. You may have driven by this house before and appreciated its Americana style. But what you're looking at is not a 1980s or 1990s throwback style. You're looking at the oldest house in Vanderburgh County. It was built by Samuel Kenyon between 1827 and 1830. So this house is pre-Victorian. When this house was built, Abraham Lincoln was a teenager living some 30 miles from right here. And then in 1947, significant repairs were done with a particular attention to historic detail. And then significant work was also completed in the 1970s, the 1990s, and today. So let's go inside and take a tour and have a talk with the current owners about what they love and about what they've done to set this house up for future owners for generations to come. And we'll also have an interview with two historians who will talk more about the time frame when this house was built and about whether or not Abraham Lincoln could have ever walked in front of this home. Let's take a look.
The first time that we actually saw the house, we were coming and visiting friends that lived here that were some good dear friends of ours, and they were having a house concert here in this living room, and we just saw there were 30 people in the house, and like what a cool way to use your home. And as we'd been here for the evening, we just kept looking around and thinking, man, this home is beautiful, it's gorgeous, we're old home people. And we said by the end of the night, we kind of laughed and said, hey, if you ever sell this house, please let us know.
I first noticed the charm. I mean, like you mentioned, we're old house people. And so walked in and I literally thought this is my favorite house I've ever walked in my life.
You know, every room that you walk in has something special about it. Again, whether it's the hand-hewn beams in the ceiling or just the fact that every doorway is just a little crooked. Everything says this house has stories to tell. And every time we open something up and we see, man, this is incredible. Like, they don't make houses like this anymore. But then we've been able to put it back in a way to know that it's gonna keep going.
We think Chip and Joanna would be proud. I love that though this house is old, it has a very open feel, and so I can be in the kitchen cooking while our kids are in here watching TV or doing homework, playing, and you still feel very connected to the life that's happening in the house.
You know, when you look at the ceilings, and it almost looks like this tavern kind of feel, like a cabin kind of feel. This, I think, would be something I would love to duplicate 20 times over, because I think it's honestly what creates this sense of rest. I'm a former U.S. history teacher for high school, and so history has always been something I've loved. Everything about this house just is historical in so many ways. They've built in the late 1820s, and I think the thing that's always been impressive to me is that the people that we read about, the people we learned about, the people I taught about were like alive and leading. The stories that we learned, they were happening when this house was built. President in 1827 was John Quincy Adams, and then Andrew Jackson, $20 bill Andrew Jackson. The things that were happening in our country, the foundational formative things that were happening in our country when this house was built, just makes me really happy to be a part of it. You know, when I watched the movie Lincoln, I'm just sitting here thinking, I wonder what my house was doing when all of this was taking place, because you know what? It was doing something. It was there.
Our book, which is being published by Indiana University Press and should be out in October of this year, is called Abe's Youth, Collected Works from the Indiana Lincoln Inquiry. It tries to put Lincoln in the context of his time in Indiana and his neighborhood in Indiana. Well, the Lincolns, of course, moved here in 1816 when he was 7 years old, and they stayed until 1830 when he was 21 when they went on to Illinois. So he would have been 18, 19, 20 years old at the time that this house, property was purchased and the house was built.
From 1827 to 1830, Lincoln was famously, had very little formal education, but he also had a drive to learn, and so he would have been reading voraciously throughout this time, seeking out people he considered to be educated and knowledgeable. He was certainly aware of other lawyers, other educated folks that were in the region. The general consensus has been among sort of the laity that yes, Lincoln learned the law in Boonville or was inspired to become a lawyer in Boonville. But among Lincoln historians for decades, it has always been believed that that's absolutely not true. There's no evidence even that there was a murder trial while Lincoln was here in Indiana, so that couldn't have been true. But we were able to prove that there were murder trials going on in Boonville during the time Lincoln was in the area. So it is entirely possible that one of those murder trials he saw, and John Brackenridge was a lawyer, and he may have seen that, and that may have inspired him.
In 28, he did the flatboat trip. That was, I think, a major experience in Lincoln's life, not just because he was exposed to things he had never seen before. It was a major responsibility. I think it was the first time Abraham Lincoln really had major responsibilities in his life. But I think you also have to look at historical context beyond Abraham Lincoln, who lived 2 counties over. If this was built in, let's say, 1828, that's 12 years after Indiana became a state. It's 3 years after the state capital was moved from Corydon to Indianapolis. It's very early in the history of this area. It was during the farming years of this area, and I think that may be more significant than the possibility that Lincoln might have been here. It's a historical treasure.
My hope for the next people, the next family that gets to enjoy this space, is that it's just a space that they can rest, that they realize that not only is a house like this special, but just the time they get together in these years are special. I think this house can facilitate that in a lot of great ways.
So no record of him being in Evansville.
Unless you want to read the Abraham Lincoln Vampire Slayers. Evansville plays a very important role in there.
Oh, tell me about that.
Well,
Is that a real thing?
Yeah, there's a real book and there was a movie about how the vampires killed his mother because Thomas had borrowed money and hadn't paid, and then that's the whole thing about the South. The whole Civil War was because the people in the South had slaves so they could fulfill their need for blood, and so they were very much against. But he came here after a vampire and was almost killed in Evansville. Evansville plays an important role in that, but don't believe any of it.
I just cut that, put it as fact on my.
You asked.